Another frustrating game and a pretty egregious thing that the Sabres players are doing towards the fans. Coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
Your Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Sabres or Locked On Drought your first listen every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. 4-3, the Anaheim Ducks, who were 19, 33 and 2 coming into this game, beat the Sabres by a 4-3 score, despite only registering 15 shots on goal. We'll talk about the game. I'm pretty fired up over a pretty damn disrespectful thing that the Sabres players are doing towards their fans, and it starts with the captain of the team. So that's coming up on today's show as well. Also, insanely good performance from Devin Levi down in Rochester. So we'll update you on how that's going as well for Levi down in Roch. We are going to get to all of your best texts from the Locked On Sabres text line, which you could join at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres. Well, you get all your updates. You get all your texts throughout the game. We'd love to hear you guys interact and get you some thoughts and takes on the show. So the Sabres in this game, I mean, they outplayed the Ducks really from the get-go, especially. The first period, they blew the doors off of the Ducks. The shots at the end of the day go 37 for Buffalo, 15 for Anaheim. But in that first period, the Sabres had 17 scoring chances to the Ducks 3. 17-3 was what you were looking at after one period of hockey. And it was a 1-1 hockey game. Greenway scored only 9 minutes in, his 9th of the season, on a really nice wrist shot over the shoulder of John Gibson to make it 1-0. Adam Henrique, within a minute, or just about a minute later, made it 1-1. And the game, the Sabres never really had that long of a lead. Even when Tage Thompson scored his 2-1 goal in the second period, it only took about 3 minutes before the Ducks responded with Frank Vetrano, who scored 2 goals in a 3-minute period for his 25th and 26th of the season. He's been very strong for Anaheim all year. And from there, I mean, the Sabres responded with Zach Benson. You had 5 goals in the second period, no goals scored in the third period. The Sabres looked like they were sleepwalking at the beginning of the third. They kind of got going a little bit later in the third, but it was a game where Don Granato, I think, kind of put it perfectly in the press conference after the fact, which was they had chances and they just didn't put the Ducks away. That's a bad hockey team that you were dominating, and you didn't put it away. There were chances. Tage Thompson on a breakaway. Casey Middlestat on a breakaway. Dylan Cousins had really strong chances. They had that one shift early on, only a couple of minutes into the hockey game, and I have been looking for signs that Peyton Krebs is worthy of playing on a higher, more offensive line that he has not had the chance to do. And here he gets going with 2 games with Zach Benson and JJ Peterka. And only a couple of minutes into the game, that line had one of the best shifts that a line has had all year long. Krebs had a chance. Benson had a one-timer from the slot where he just missed the net. Peterka had a wrist shot from the right wall. There was a shot from the point, I think, that just didn't get through. They were buzzing. And that line, I thought, had a pretty strong night all the way through. If you look at their shot attempts as a line, they were the best for the Sabres. They had 19 shot attempts at 5-on-5, Krebs, Peterka, and Benson. They actually also played the most minutes So Don Granato must have been impressed. That line as a whole played 13 minutes 5-on-5 together. The Cousins line was second at 11 minutes. That line played well as also. But by the way, here's another game. And Tage Thompson was fine. He had his chances. He scored a goal on the power play. It's another game where I think at 5-on-5, and I'm saying this to myself a lot lately, that the Tage Thompson line's their third best line. Here was the game where I thought this was true. I thought the Krebs line was better than the Thompson line. I thought the Cousins, Middlestat, and Greenway line was awesome as well. I think the Girgensons line was horrible, and the numbers kind of, show that at the end of the day. But I thought that there was a lot of good stuff that we saw from that Krebs line. I think they absolutely need to keep it going. In fact, I mentioned the scoring chances in the first period. That line alone. So I'll go scoring chances for versus scoring chances against for each line. The Girgensons line had 3 chances and they gave up 2. The Thompson line had 5 scoring chances and gave up 4. This is all 5-on-5, by the way, obviously. The Cousins line had 5 chances and gave up 3. The Krebs line with Peterka and Benson had 11 scoring chances and only gave up 2. I bet a few of those that I just kind of ran through were on that first shift that they had. But I love that line. I would absolutely keep it together. But the frustrating thing, again, is here are the Sabres generating shots, generating chances, 37 shots on the night, and they find a way to lose. In past games, it's been their best players simply just not scoring. And you had a little bit of that tonight. What you had tonight is 2 things working in concert. You had the guys that are paid to score, not scoring, not burying the amount of chances that they should have buried. And you had a rare off night by Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. 4 goals allowed on 15 shots is pretty tough. That's a pretty tough night for Luukkonen at the end of it. What the expected goals in this game for Anaheim were 1.5. So he gave up 2.5 goals above really what he should have. They can't lose a hockey game. Listen to this. How do you lose a hockey game where shot attempts, all situations, I'll include power play for this whole hockey game, the Ducks had 29 shot attempts. The Sabres had 71. Now, I think there's someone rightfully here to tell me about the quality of chances, right? Like, get more quality. But, hey, I'm looking at some of the heat maps, and the Sabres were getting around the net a little bit in this game. So I don't know if tonight's the night for that. I think John Gibson had a really strong game. I think the Sabres' top players came close and weren't able to finish. And I thought Don Granato was looking for answers. He got pushed a little bit by certain media members after the game. And my impression of what Granato said was that he needs more from his best players, but he doesn't want to just come right out and say that because he's a good coach and he doesn't want to throw his guys under the bus. But without saying it, I think that's got to be what you're thinking in that spot of, hey, we played well. We're better than that hockey team. It's clear as day. The Sabres are a better hockey team than the Ducks. But if your top players aren't going to produce and be consistent, then you have a talent problem. That needs to be questioned. Do the Sabres have a talent problem? Because the top teams in the league very rarely lose games like that. Sometimes, the Sabres often lose games like that recently, where they look like the better hockey team, but they're not capitalizing on their opportunities, and therefore, they're not winning hockey games. So, not a great night overall. Greenway got his 9th. Thompson got his 16th, starting to pile up the stats a little bit for Tage. Zach Benson scored his 6th of the season, only his 2nd home goal of the year. Another strong shift by that line. A wrist shot from Yoki Haru from the point. Who would have thought it would have took the 18-year-old, right? How often have we heard in recent weeks, well, the Sabres are getting shots from the outside and from the point, but if you're going to play like that, you got to have somebody in front of the net. And you generally think about guys like Greenway or Okposo for that, big body, physical players. There's 18-year-old Zach Benson camped in front of the net with a perfect tip to get past John Gibson. that tied the game at that point for a 3-3 hockey game, but it wasn't enough. The Sabres fall 4-3 to the Ducks. I was in attendance. Did not get to try the hot dog of the day. It was the Wild Wing dog, but it was kind of like a beef on weck dog, so I don't really know what the correlation is there. This was a Monday 12:30 game on President's Day when all schools had off. It was a de facto kids' day. It was every time they bang the dun, 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 the Let's Go Buffalo was one of the most high-pitched Let's Go Buffaloes you'll ever get, because it was just straight kids that were taking apart. And that will kind of get me to my next thought here coming up in the second segment. This mind-melding story to me about the Sabres and no longer saluting the fans after games, especially on the heels of a game where they lost in front of a lot of kids, the next generation of Sabre fan. I got to get to that when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented by Camino Consulting. How would you like to get to know someone better in an hour than you would in a year? Understanding one another better prevents small misunderstandings from becoming big ongoing fights. After providing more than 20 years of service to small and mid-sized businesses, helping management groups navigate conflict and onboarding new employees, Camino is offering a digital seminar for families and couples. Did your Valentine's gift of tickets to the game not go over so as well as you hoped? You could have thought that on here on Monday. Get the couples and family online seminar for 25% off for the month of February using the discount code Locked On. Again, that is discount code Locked On for 25% off for the rest of the month at www.caminoconsulting.ca. Or mention Locked On when reaching out for a business seminar and receive the first 5 profiles free. Back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Not a great game to be talking about after the fact, but, we have a lot of those. Locked On Sports Today. Check them out. First ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. It's on YouTube. It's also available on Amazon Fire TV. You can find it in the free Fire TV channels app. Little reaction to the NBA All-Star game and a bunch of other stuff that happened over the weekend. You had a 17-goal game in the NHL on here between the Wild and the Canucks. Maybe they'll even touch on that a little bit. So, 4-3, Ducks over the Sabres. What can you say? Just that's how the season's gone, right? Who's surprised that they lose at home to the Anaheim Ducks? As bad as that Ducks team even is. Much worse than the Sabres, if you ask me. Greenway gets a goal. Benson gets a goal. The assists you had on the night, 2 by Cousins. He's starting to put the points up a little bit. Peterka gets an assist on the night. Dahlin, Yoki Haru. Dahlin at one point threw his stick up into the air in frustration because of that penalty that Middlestat took at the end of the game. Dahlin you'll always notice when he's mad. He is going to show you. And some fans like that. In fact, most probably do. Like somebody out there showing emotion, and Dahlin often is the one that will do that. Speaking of emotion, I got a little emotional in a negative way when reading Mike Harrington's story this weekend over at the Buffalo News about the Sabres players and the salute that they do at the end of games after wins, which I can remember when they started doing that, which was in the 2011 season, that they would go to center ice. And I think the Rangers were the first team to do this consistently, maybe right before that. But they would go to center ice, raise your sticks in the air, a little salute to the fans for the night that was. And they've been doing that ever since. Through a lot of bad times. Still been doing it ever since. And I've never remembered them stopping that. After games, even when they were in dead last, I don't think they stopped that. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I don't. So here is a group of fans that kind of let Mike Harrington and Paul Hamilton and others that go to the games consistently and say, hey, after these games, I've kind of noticed they're not doing this anymore. Have you noticed the same thing? And even Mike said, because I know this from, the once or twice I've been up in the press box. The way it works is you watch the game in the press box, but generally when there's less than a minute to go or right when the buzzer sounds, as a media member, you're all the way up high. You're up there in that you can see the press box if you're in the arena. It's way up there. And you got to get down to the locker room. And those player interviews start like within minutes. So you're hustling to get to that elevator. that will take you right down to the ground floor, and then you do quick walk over to the locker room. So minute you hear the whistle, the final whistle, you got to go. So Mike even wrote that after the last couple of games, especially the LA game, I think he said, he stayed. Let me see let's see if anything's happened here. And he noticed what other fans had pointed out. It's not really happening anymore. Now, the Kings game, as he mentioned, they won 7-0, and you had a couple of players that came out, like 6 or 7 maybe, that came out to center ice, kind of like not a complete team out there. Thanks, fans, for a great night. 7-0, a lot of energy in the crowd. It was, I don't remember how many, 16,000 people. It wasn't half full. A little of that, not much. And before that, nothing. Zilch. So Harrington writes about this. And the one quote, the one thing he writes that I want to take out of this more than anything, there's a lot of good details in it. I don't want to give the whole thing away. Given I knew I was going to mess this word up the second I saw it written. Given anonymity, so he could speak freely, a veteran Sabre said simply that the team made a decision to stick together in support of its coach. Basically, an admission that they've stopped doing it, and they know they've stopped doing it. And there's more details in this, but you can kind of pick up the tea leaves. Go back to the Columbus game in December where the Sabres lost 9-4. I was in the arena that night. It was a Tuesday night game, and it was bad. It was half empty because Tuesday night games generally are not that full in the first place. This was December 19th. Although the attendance I saw is announced at 14,000 when I looked it up. They got their doors blown off. 9-4. It was 7-1 at one point. I think around that point, second period, they're down like 7-1. And there's the Fire Donnie chants that are scattered throughout the arena. But you got a little of it. I'll say this. I've heard a lot worse. I've not heard them at any game since, but I've heard a lot worse. I had forgotten about it because I only remembered hearing it one time or seeing it referenced one time. And it was that game. And I thought, oh, the Fire Donnie chants. Wow. But it wasn't that loud. And it didn't last that long. 20 seconds, maybe. It was probably even shorter than that. And then you had Rasmus Dahlin reference that Thursday after they lost to Columbus, where they beat Toronto, scoring 9 goals. And he made the point that they took it personally, and they were playing for Donnie in that Toronto game, which is fine. If you do hear that, all right, play hard for him. Then I thought it was it. There was nothing more to it. How could there be? I forgot that it even happened because it's not like Don Granato. There are calls for his job. I mean, I see the texts all the time. I hear the listeners all the time ask about it, talk about it. It's not as ugly as it's been. I've seen a lot worse, man. When Housley was in year 2, everyone in the world was after him. And then you had Kruger, of course. 18-game losing streak, whatever. Everyone was after him. It was ugly. It was pretty mean-spirited towards those coaches. Get out of here, basically. And with Granato, I think it's a little bit more fair. It's a little bit more timid. And Granato, remember, has coached more games than those guys. He is the longest tenured coach during the Sabres drought and the 6th longest tenured coach in the National Hockey League. Any question about his job is fair. If you want to be mad that they're chanting fire the coach one time, all right. But to still be carrying that around into February when the team isn't producing, that's where I have a real problem with this. If it indeed is a conscious decision, which this report is implying it is, a conscious decision by the players to not salute the fans at the end of it, essentially saying, you guys aren't being patient enough. Elliot Friedman put it perfectly last week when he said on 32 Thoughts, it's not reasonable to ask these people to be any more patient. No fan base in National Hockey League history has ever been asked to do what Sabres fans have done the last 13 years. No one has ever been asked to go through a 13-year playoff drought because it's never happened in the NHL before. And with that are increasing ticket prices, are an arena that is crumbling, dirty seats, I mean, they're finally going to put some renovation into that. So that's going to maybe be back on the way up. A team that for half the drought, I think the last couple of years, this has been a lot better. But for half the drought, all of the fan relations stuff, the 50th anniversary season, and a lot of the promotional stuff, just a total and epic disaster for half of the drought as well. And teams that have repeatedly let the Sabres fans down. It's not fair to ask them to be patient. And I think, in my opinion, with this coach and GM, given the circumstance, they've been pretty patient. I think they've been pretty patient. It's 250 games. It's not 82. It's not 50. It's 250 games with this group. And the guy that I point to the most for this is Kyle Okposo. How in the world does the captain of this hockey team that has been a part of this team, it's not like he just showed up. If it was year one, it's, hey man, we're getting a tough ride from the fans. We just got here. This drought's not on us. 8 years. Kyle Okposo's been here for 8 years. And I'll point to something that is not, I don't think, being shown by Okposo or by the Sabres organization on this front as much. Sean McDermott, the Bills head coach, showed up, and on day one, when his introductory press conference happened as Bills head coach in 2017, they were in a 17-year playoff drought. And he said that we own the drought. He said that the minute that I take over as head coach of the Buffalo Bills, that's on me. You're the coach of the Bills, you own the drought. And he represented the right attitude. He basically said, I have to. How could I do any different? And that attitude is not represented by the Buffalo Sabres, and especially, I want to say right now, their captain, because that's the guy I would look to nip this in the bud. I don't even know, maybe he's the one who orchestrated it. One veteran source, according to Mike Harrington, is the one that says the team made a decision. I mean, how can I not look at Okposo, right? But you're the captain of the team. You are the leader of that locker room. And even Zemgus Girgensons next to him, because he is also seen as a leader of that locker room. He's been here for 10 of the 13 years. Those two should know what fans have had to deal with. They've been there. They've been in that building for a decade to see it up close and personal. They should know. I don't know. I start wondering about Okposo a little bit and how he's been, I've never been, someone that's want to be critical of him for this. He's been a defender of Jack Eichel and Sam Reinhart. And I think maybe rightfully so. He went to the finals last year to support them. And I remember him talking in defense of Eichel when his surgery thing was happening, when the Sabres were trying to trade him. So does Okposo carry a... Does he rub him the wrong way the Sabres treated Eichel when they came back? And then that in addition to the fire Donnie chants and the boos at the end of every first period when they're losing? Does all that add up to, we're not saluting you anymore? Whatever it is, it's shameful to me by the group of players on the ice. It's downright disrespectful, and it is a complete and utter embarrassment. And it's a complete lack of awareness to me of what your fan base has had to endure. And it's especially embarrassing and disrespectful to me if it is led or has been signed off on by the two veteran leaders in that locker room that have been a part of most of the Sabres playoff drought. Those two, I'll say this. I mean, this might happen anyway. The deadline's coming up. And if not, off season where there'll be free agents. In my opinion, if you've kept around a Kyle Okposo and a Zemgus Girgensons to be the leader of men in that locker room, to help shape that young group, to be the veteran voices, if the end result of keeping those two around to be in that role is they decide we're going to stop saluting fans at the end of the game because they're being too mean to the coach, then they can't be on this hockey team anymore. They shouldn't be on this hockey team anymore. That guy shouldn't be the captain of this hockey team. Plain and simple. If it's going to be fans versus the rest, I don't need to do any more than I just said. You shouldn't be the captain and the two leaders of this team if you have allowed, signed off on, or orchestrated that move. Kevyn Adams has worked very hard in the last couple of years, and he's even talked about it. Job one was repairing the relationship with the fans. He's been saying that for years. And I can't believe, I got to imagine, what does Kevyn Adams think of this? Where he's working tirelessly, mostly through the roster, but other areas as well. He's trying to win the fans back. They were starting to do that last year. Adams is trying to win the fans back. And then he sees this, and he sees my captain is basically giving the fans a middle finger. Am I wrong for viewing it that way? You tell me, the listeners, if I'm wrong, if I'm going too far with it. But that's how I view it. I view it as the captain and the assistant captain of this team, the veteran voices, because they should have the respect of everybody, or the respect to stop it and stand up in that locker room and say, we're not disrespecting these fans, especially the ones that are left in the building. There aren't that many left. They should be untouchable. The ones that are left there, that are paying the money and hiring the babysitter to go out to watch them lose 4-2 to the Canadiens. Those are the ones that we don't want to give you any respect at the end of the game when you've stuck around and you're into game 900 of this drought. Yeah, we don't care. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. And again, if it's true, I think you need new leadership on this hockey team. You need to make Dahlin captain. You need to do something. All right, time out here. We'll get to more positive storyline when we come back. Down on the farm in Rochester, Devin Levi is balling. We'll tell you what's been happening coming back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented by Sleeper. Past the halfway point of the season. You just heard it. It's not going great. Want to remind you, though, that while the team might not be winning, you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper, our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. What players will have more or less for goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in a given game? Look through the likes of a Connor McDavid, of an Alex Ovechkin, a Nathan McKinnon, and plenty more. Pick 8 of those players with the more or less for their stats, and if you win and you get all 8 players right, you win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention, nail your picks so you can start winning big. When you do, use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Final segment here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. Okay, so Devin Levi, who has not been starting in Buffalo. They called up Dustin Tokarski just to be the backup. Eric Comrie was sick. It looked maybe Luukkonen and him kind of passed back an illness back and forth, whatever. So no Comrie to back up. Luukkonen got the start again in goal. Levi has been allowed to cook a little bit down in Rochester. And Levi has been really strong for the Amerks since going down there. His numbers in 10 starts for the Amerks leading into Monday's game against the Toronto Marlies. 10 games, a 2.38 save percentage, a 930 save percentage, 238 goals against, 930 save percentage, and a 6.22 record. 6-2-2. Levi has been tremendous. Then Monday shows up, and they're playing the Marlies, who are always great, right, in the AHL? Devin Levi stands on his head. The Amerks win 2-1 in overtime, led by number one star Devin Levi, who had 52 saves on 53 shots. 52 saves on 53 shots. The guy's on fire in Rochester. And if you look at save percentage right now, he is .001 away from the number one goalie in the AHL this year in save percentage. He's played fewer games than most guys, usually about half or a third. But by the numbers, he's like the best goalie that the AHL has seen all year. And I have pointed out that, just keep this in mind, you might think his season didn't go that well for the Sabres. He's down in Rochester mostly because Luukkonen took over. Because Luukkonen got rolling, and you can't take Luukkonen out the way he's been playing. Otherwise, Levi'd be here, and he'd probably still be getting the number one work or the 1A work. Now, how good would it be going? Let me just say this. If Luukkonen's been great. Luukkonen's been better than Levi would have been doing, probably. Almost, I think, undoubtedly. Last year, I like using goal saved over expected. I'll use it again here. Last season, goaltending let the Sabres down. It was the number one reason that they missed the playoffs. That and the blue line, just the careless mistakes. But the goaltending really, really let the Sabres down. So last year, where did the Sabres goaltenders rank in goals saved above expected? Okay, let's look. Out of 79 goaltenders that played at least 10 games last year, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen ranked 52nd. Behind him was Eric Comrie, 69th. And Craig Anderson, a little bit higher, 38th, but he only played 26 games. Now let's go to this season. How good has Levi been in comparison to those two, where Luukkonen and Comrie were two of the worst goalies in the league, and Anderson was a little bit more average, but he wasn't able to play that often. This year, out of 69 goaltenders, Levi ranks 37th. He's basically played at Craig Anderson level this year, but he's 22 years old, and if Luukkonen hadn't been performing, Levi could have played a lot more than Anderson would have been able to play last year. And I said this, most probably said it last year, that if Anderson was younger, but able to give them the production he did, he would have been their number one goalie and they would have made the playoffs. We all knew that, right? All they needed was Anderson to be able to play more, and they would have been able to do it. They would have been able to make it, but he's too old. Levi has been a middle-of-the-road goaltender in the NHL this year. Average goaltending. It hasn't been that bad. I looked through his game log. There's not that many bad starts. There's a couple. There's not that many great ones either, which is, I think, the big difference between him and Luukkonen. Luukkonen, this was one of his first bad games of the year against Anaheim. He's had some amazing games. Levi hasn't had a ton of those. He had a couple. You had a game against Montreal in early January. But if you look through his games, like he's got two games. I should say 2 games all year where he's allowed more than 4 goals. You know, he's got a bunch of games where he allowed 2, even early in the year. They beat Tampa at home where he only allowed 2 goals. They beat Minnesota where he allowed 2 goals. 2 goals against Arizona, 2 goals against Vegas. These are wins. 1 goal against Boston. He's had a up and down year, but the quality start percentage is a 42%. That's not bad. So I think Levi, I want to go from not only is he having a normal developmental season for a 22-year-old, I want to say he's having a good one. He's having a good development season for a 22-year-old. Average NHL goaltending, elite AHL goaltending. That's good. 2 years ago, before all the college hype, you would have taken that. Everybody would have taken that. So more power to Levi. What are they going to do, though, coming up is a big question. I'll say this. Any idea that he should have been in Rochester all along, so you got to let him stay down there, I disagree with that. I think you can have just as much development at the NHL level, playing at an average level, than getting elite production at the AHL level. And they have a couple back-to-backs coming up. They've got a back-to-back March 2nd and 3rd against Vegas and Winnipeg, and then another one, the 6th and the 7th against Toronto and Nashville. I say you let Levi get a few more starts in Rochester, and then when you have those 2 sets of back-to-back, you throw him back into the rotation. You give him 2 games there, and if he plays well, you get him back in the NHL rotation. If he doesn't, you let him finish the year down in the AHL. But especially with Luukkonen having a bad game here against Anaheim, and Levi playing so well at the AHL, I do think he should get another opportunity to reestablish himself as part of the rotation in the NHL. And I think those 2 sets of back-to-backs in the first week of March are the time to do it. All right, it's going to do it for us today here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Some fire and some fury. We'll see. Maybe I'll be a little bit calmer on tomorrow's show, but I don't know. This Okposo, not even a post story. This Sabres salute story, I think it's a big deal, personally. That's going to do it for us today here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Hopefully we'll get better things for the Sabres coming up. They play Montreal on Wednesday. Thanks for listening today to the Locked On Sabres podcast. We're trying to get the rest of your sports fix in. Check in Locked On Sports today. The first ever National Sports 24/7 channel on YouTube. It's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. We'll talk to you tomorrow here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.